She signed a contract to marry a Korean prince for exactly 90 days, no feelings, no attachments, just 90 days to save her family from financial ruin, and then she'd walk away like none of it ever happened. But on the 89th night, when she packed her bags in silence preparing to disappear from his life forever, he did something no one expected. He broke every royal protocol, ran through rain-soaked palace corridors, and fell to his knees before her, whispering words that shattered both their worlds.
You were never my
contract. You were my choice. And this is the story of how a Black American woman became the one person a Korean crown prince couldn't let go. So stay until the very end, because what happens in those final moments will leave you breathless. Before we dive in, if you love emotional Afro-Korean romance stories that hit different, smash that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I drop these heart-wrenching stories every single week. Drop a comment saying 90 days if you'd risk everything for true love. Now let's get into this story. Amara Thompson never imagined her life would change because of a fashion competition. She was a 24-year-old design student at Parsons in New York, working 3 part-time jobs to keep herself afloat while sending money back home to her mother in Atlanta. Her father had passed 2 years earlier, leaving behind medical bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. Her younger brother was trying to get into college and her mother was working herself to exhaustion. Amara carried that weight on her shoulders every single day, sketching designs late into the night, dreaming of the day she could finally give her family the life they deserved. When she saw the announcement for the Global Fashion Innovation Summit in Seoul, she almost scrolled past it. The grand prize was $100,000 and a mentorship with one of Asia's top fashion houses. It seemed too good to be true, but something made her stop. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was hope. She spent 3 sleepless weeks perfecting her portfolio, pouring every ounce of her soul into designs that blended African textiles with modern Korean silhouettes. She shipped her application the day before the deadline and tried not to think about it again. 6 weeks later she got the email. She'd won. Not just an honorable mention or a runner-up position, but the entire competition. Amara screamed so loud in her tiny Brooklyn apartment that her neighbor banged on the wall. She called her mother, crying and promising that everything was about to change. The organization would fly her to Seoul, cover all her expenses for a month, and connect her with industry leaders. It was the miracle she'd been praying for. Seoul welcomed her with neon lights and possibilities. The first week was a blur of workshops, networking events, and cultural immersions. Amara fell in love with the city immediately, the way ancient palaces stood beside glass skyscrapers, the smell of street food mixing with expensive perfumes, the fashion scene that was both traditional and wildly experimental. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. People stared at her everywhere she went, a Black woman with natural coils and bold red lipstick turned heads in a city that wasn't used to seeing women who looked like her. Some stares were curious and some were cold, but she learned to lift her chin higher and keep moving. On the 8th day, everything changed when she was called into a private meeting at the luxury hotel where the summit was being held. The organizers, 3 older Korean women in impeccable hanbok-inspired suits, sat across from her with expressions she couldn't read. They congratulated her again on winning, then asked a question that made her blood run cold. "Miss Thompson, are you currently in a relationship?" Amara blinked. What does that have to do with fashion? And the women exchanged glances. The eldest one leaned forward, saying this competition was not entirely what it seemed. It was also an opportunity to find a suitable match for someone very important, someone who needs a partner who is talented, independent, and willing to think beyond conventional boundaries. Amara's stomach dropped. A match? Like a dating thing? And the woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A marriage arrangement, temporary of course, 90 days. In exchange your family will receive $500,000 immediately plus all debts cleared. After the 90 days you return to your life. The marriage will be quietly annulled and no one needs to know it was anything other than real. $500,000, all her mother's debts erased, her brother's college paid for, 3 months of her life for a lifetime of freedom for everyone she loved. Amara's hand shook as she asked, who is this person? But the women didn't answer directly. You'll meet him tomorrow. If you agree, contracts will be signed immediately. You have until tonight to decide. Amara didn't sleep that night. She walked the streets of Seoul until her feet ached, trying to make sense of what was happening. This was insane. People didn't do this in real life. But then she thought about her mother's tired voice on their last phone call, the way her brother tried to hide his disappointment about college, the medical bills that kept coming even though her father was gone. 3 months. She could survive anything for 3 months. She texted the organizers at 3 a.m. saying I'll do it. The next morning she was driven to a location outside the city. They blindfolded her for the last part of the journey, which should have terrified her but somehow felt inevitable. When the blindfold came off, she was standing in front of a palace, not a tourist attraction but a real functioning royal residence with guards and gates and a level of security that made her mouth go dry. This wasn't just some rich businessman. This was royalty. She was led through corridors that smelled like jasmine and history. Servants bowed as she passed, but no one spoke to her directly. She felt like she was walking through a dream or maybe a nightmare. Finally she was brought to a private sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden that looked like a painting, and there he was. Crown Prince Lee Donghyun, 28 years old, educated at Oxford, fluent in 5 languages, the face of modern Korean royalty, he stood with his back to her with hands clasped behind him looking out at the garden. He didn't turn around when she entered and the silence stretched until Amara couldn't take it anymore. "So you're the person I'm supposed to marry?" His voice was cold when he finally spoke. "I didn't ask for this." He turned to face her and Amara understood immediately why. Millions of people obsessed over him. He was beautiful in a way that seemed almost unfair with his sharp jawline, dark eyes that held secrets and perfect posture that came from a lifetime of being watched. But there was something else there too, exhaustion and resentment. He looked at her like she was a problem he had to solve. "I didn't ask for it either," Amara shot back because she wasn't about to let him make her feel small, but apparently we're both stuck in this situation, and something flickered in his eyes, maybe surprised that she'd talked back to him. "The arrangement is simple. We marry in 3 days, private ceremony, you'll live in the palace for 90 days, after that you disappear, no interviews, no tell-all books. You take your money and you forget this ever happened." And when Amara asked what do you get out of this? Donghyun's jaw tightened. "I get my family and the royal council off my back about marriage. I get 3 months of peace and then I can choose my own path." His words were bitter and Amara realized something crucial. He was just as trapped as she was, maybe in a golden cage but still a cage. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparations that felt completely surreal. Amara was measured for hanbok and wedding dresses. She was briefed on royal protocol by a stern woman named Mrs. Kong who looked at her like she was a stain on expensive fabric. The rules were endless. How to bow at different angles depending on who she was greeting. How to hold her hands when sitting. How to eat without making noise. What topics were acceptable in conversation and which ones were forbidden. Every single movement was choreographed, practiced and corrected. She learned the hierarchy of the palace staff, the head housekeeper who controlled the domestic workers, the protocol officers who managed public appearances, the security team who followed the royal family everywhere, the kitchen staff who prepared elaborate meals according to centuries-old traditions. Everyone had a place, a function, a role to play, and Amara was trying to figure out where she fit in this intricate machine. Knowing she was only meant to be a temporary part, the fittings for her wedding clothes took hours, traditional hanbok and rich silks with each layer symbolic of something she barely understood, a modern white dress for the brief Western ceremony portion and jewelry that was heavier than it looked pressing against her skin like the weight of expectation. Every time she looked in the mirror she saw a stranger, someone polished and proper and not quite herself. The only person who showed her any real kindness was Donghyun's younger sister Princess Jaiwa, who snuck into Amara's temporary quarters the night before the wedding saying, "I'm sorry about all this. My brother's not a bad person. He's just angry about everything." And Amara appreciated the honesty, asking, "Why me? Why did they pick a black American woman for this?" Jaiwa's expression grew serious. "Because you won the competition fair and square. Because you're talented and beautiful and you have your own accomplishments. They wanted someone who couldn't be accused of being bought, someone with dignity." She paused. "And honestly, I think some of the council members thought you'd be easier to control because you're an outsider, but they were wrong about that part." Jaiwa smiled. "I saw the way you talked back to Donghyun in your first meeting. The staff gossip about everything and you're already a legend." The wedding was nothing like Amara had imagined weddings could be. It was held in a private chapel on the palace grounds with only 30 people present, all family and high-ranking officials, no friends, no celebration, just ceremony and signatures and the weight of something she didn't fully understand. Donghyun barely looked at her, and when they had to kiss it was the briefest touch of lips, cold and perfunctory. The whole thing took 45 minutes, and just like that Amara Thompson became Crown Princess Lee Amara of South Korea, at least on paper. Her new quarters in the palace were stunning, a suite of rooms that included a bedroom larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, a private bathroom with a soaking tub that could fit 3 people and a sitting area that overlooked the same garden she'd seen on her first day. The furniture was a mix of traditional Korean pieces and modern comfort with silk cushions, carved wooden screens and a desk by the window where morning light pooled like honey, but beautiful as it was it felt like a very luxurious prison. Guards were posted outside her door. She couldn't leave the palace grounds without permission and escorts. Her phone was taken and replaced with one that was monitored, and she was completely isolated from everything and everyone she'd ever known. The first 2 weeks were the hardest because Donghyun avoided her completely. They had separate bedrooms and separate schedules. The only time they saw each other was at formal dinners with the family where they sat side by side and pretended to be a couple while making minimal conversation. His mother, Queen Consort Yoon, watched Amara with an expression that gave nothing away, not hostile, not warm, just observing and calculating, while his father, the king, barely acknowledged her existence. Beyond the necessary pleasantries, the palace staff treated her with barely concealed contempt. They whispered in Korean when she walked by, assuming she couldn't understand, so she started taking Korean lessons with a private tutor just to know what they were saying about her. Most of it was cruel. The foreign mistake, the contract bride, she'll be gone soon enough. Can you imagine her trying to bear royal children? What would they even look like? And the tutor, an elderly woman named Professor Kim, noticed Amara's expression darken during one lesson, saying quietly, "You understand more than they think. Good, let them underestimate you. It's an advantage." Amara cried herself to sleep more nights than she wanted to admit. She thought about her mother, about the money that had already been transferred and was already changing her family's life. Her brother had enrolled in Howard University, her mother had quit one of her 3 jobs and the medical bills were paid. It was worth it. It had to be worth it. She reminded herself it was only 90 days. She could survive anything for 90 days, but loneliness was a special kind of torture. She was surrounded by people but had never felt more alone. The palace had its own rhythm with morning prayers in the family temple. Breakfast served at exactly 7 a.m., scheduled activities and appearances, afternoon tea and formal dinners, everything timed and everything planned. Amara tried to find spaces for herself. She sketched in her room designing clothes she'd never make. She explored the gardens during the brief windows when she was allowed outside, and she read books from the palace library, losing herself in stories about other people's lives. On the 16th night something shifted. Amara couldn't sleep and decided to walk through the palace gardens despite the late hour. She didn't think anyone would be there, but as she rounded a corner near a small pond she nearly collided with someone. Donghyun. He was sitting on a stone bench still wearing his formal day clothes and staring at the water with an expression of such exhaustion that Amara stopped in her tracks. "Sorry, I didn't think anyone would be out here," she said automatically. And he looked up at her. For the first time his face wasn't cold, just tired, couldn't sleep, and Amara shook her head. "This place is beautiful but it's also really quiet, too quiet." Donghyun gestured to the bench beside him and after a moment's hesitation Amara sat down. They were quiet for a long time just listening to the sound of water moving and night insects singing. Then Donghyun spoke, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I'm sorry about how I've treated you. This isn't your fault. You're just trying to help your family and I understand that." Amara was so surprised she didn't know what to say, but he continued, "I never wanted any of this, the arranged marriage, the pressure. My whole life has been decided for me, what I study, where I go, who I meet. This was supposed to be the one thing I could control and then they took even that away." His vulnerability was unexpected and somehow made him more human. "I get it," Amara said quietly, "different circumstances but I understand feeling like you don't have choices. That's why I agreed to this, not for me but for my family." Donghyun turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time, asking, "Tell me about them, your family." And so Amara did. She told him about her mother's strength, her brother's dreams and her father's legacy. She told him about growing up in Atlanta, about her love for fashion and about the designs she used to sketch in the margins of her notebooks during boring classes. She talked about her father's laugh and how much she missed it, about her mother's hands worn from work but always gentle, and about her brother's terrible jokes and big ambitions. Donghyun listened to all of it, and when she finished he told her about his own life, the pressure of being heir, the loneliness of always being watched, and the sister he was close to but couldn't protect from the same fate awaiting her. He told her about studying at Oxford where for a brief time he'd been almost normal, just another student, not a prince. He talked about his love for photography, a hobby the council considered frivolous, and about nights like this when the palace felt like a beautiful trap. They talked until the sun started to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time since arriving in Seoul Amara felt like she could breathe. After that night things changed slowly but surely. Donghyun started joining her for breakfast. He showed her parts of the palace that tourists never saw, secret passageways used by servants, a rooftop garden where his mother grew rare orchids, and the old library that smelled like ancient paper and contained books in languages Amara didn't recognize. They started taking evening walks together through the gardens, talking about everything and nothing. He introduced her to his favorite Korean dishes and laughed when she made faces at the one she couldn't handle while she showed him her fashion sketches, and he surprised her by actually understanding the technical aspects since his mother had been a textile artist before marrying into the royal family, and he'd absorbed more about fabric and design than he'd realized. One afternoon Donghyun took Amara to his private photography studio, a converted room in a remote wing of the palace where the walls were covered with his work, stunning black and white portraits, landscapes that captured Seoul's contradiction between old and new, and candid shots of Jaewook laughing. "These are incredible," Amara breathed while moving from image to image. "Why doesn't anyone know about this?" And Donghyun's expression was guarded. "Because it's mine, the one thing that's just mine. If I showed the world it would become part of the performance, the artistic prince, another marketing angle for the monarchy." He paused. "You're the first person outside my family I've ever shown," and Amara understood the gift he was giving her, trust, vulnerability, and a glimpse of who he really was beneath the crown. The palace staff noticed the change and the whispers got quieter. Some people started treating Amara with something approaching respect. Professor Kim smiled more during their Korean lessons, and even Mrs. Khan, the stern protocol officer, softened slightly, correcting Amara's posture with gentler words. Princess Jaewook became a real friend, taking Amara on secret shopping trips into the city while disguised in masks and casual clothes. They'd walk through Myeongdong eating street food and trying on sunglasses at tourist shops, pretending to be normal girls for a few precious hours. "You're good for him, you know," Jaewook said during one of these trips while munching on tteokbokki at a street cart. "Donghyun, I haven't seen him this relaxed in years," and Amara felt her chest tighten. "We're not, this is temporary," but Jaewook gave her a knowing look. "Is it though? Because the way you two look at each other doesn't seem temporary to me. Amara wanted to argue but she couldn't because somewhere between the late-night conversations and the shared laughter and the moments of quiet understanding feelings had snuck in anyway, dangerous feelings that had no place in a 90-day contract. For the first time Amara started to feel like maybe she could survive these 90 days, maybe even enjoy parts of them, but of course the outside world had to intrude. It started small with a paparazzi photo snapped through a telephoto lens showing Amara and Donghyun walking in the gardens close enough that their hands almost touched. The photo sold to a tabloid, then spread across social media like wildfire, and within hours the speculation exploded. Who was this black woman living in the palace? Why was she so close to the crown prince, and where did she come from? The palace tried to control the narrative, releasing a carefully worded statement saying Crown Prince Lee Donghyun had married in a private ceremony. His bride was an accomplished American fashion designer and the couple requested privacy, but it did nothing to stop the frenzy. Within days every detail of Amara's life had been excavated by journalists and internet sleuths. Her Instagram was found and dissected, her old school photos circulated, and interviews with people she barely knew appeared in tabloids, while everyone had an opinion about her fashion choices, her hair, her smile, and her worthiness. The tabloids were brutal with headlines like Crown Prince's foreign bride and Black woman marries into Korean royalty. What were they thinking? And the racism was blatant and ugly. Think pieces were written about cultural appropriation, about whether an outsider could ever truly understand Korean traditions, and about the purity of bloodlines. Social media exploded with opinions, and some people were supportive, calling it progressive and beautiful, with hashtags like Black Girl Magic and Love Knows No Borders. Fan art appeared and messages of encouragement from strangers who saw themselves in Amara's story came through, but the hateful voices were louder. Death threats came through palace channels with emails describing in graphic detail what people wanted to do to her. Protests formed outside the gates with people holding signs demanding the marriage be annulled, saying Amara was ruining the purity of the royal bloodline. Korean nationalist groups called her an invasion, and international anti-black voices used her as ammunition for their agendas. It was overwhelming, crushing, and impossible to escape. Even though Amara wasn't allowed to have her real phone, she heard about it all because the staff talked and the news played in common areas, and the hate seeped in through every crack. Amara tried to pretend it didn't hurt because she'd faced racism before and knew how to build walls around her heart, but this was different. This was millions of people she'd never met deciding she wasn't worthy of basic respect and deciding her existence was an insult. She stopped eating as much and stopped sleeping well, while the palace that had started to feel bearable became suffocating again. Donghyun found her crying in the garden one afternoon after a particularly vicious article went viral where someone had deepfaked her into pornographic images, and the palace legal team was working to have them removed, but the damage was done. Without saying a word, Donghyun pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry they're doing this to you. You don't deserve any of this." And when she finally calmed down, he pulled back to look at her with his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her want to cry all over again. "We don't have to keep doing this. I can end it early, release you from the contract, and you'd still get the money. You'd be free." But Amara shook her head because she wasn't a quitter and she'd survived worse than angry strangers on the internet. "I'm staying," she said firmly. "I'm finishing what I started and they don't get to chase me away." Something in Donghyun's expression shifted, showing respect, admiration, and maybe something more. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" And Amara's breath caught because the way he was looking at her made her heart race in a way that felt dangerous. This was a contract and she wasn't supposed to feel things, but somewhere between the late-night conversations and the shared laughter and the moments of quiet understanding, feelings had snuck in anyway. It happened gradually and then all at once, the way Donghyun started reaching for her hand during public appearances and holding on even when the cameras weren't watching, the way Amara caught herself watching him during meetings and memorizing the way he gestured when he was passionate about something, the way they gravitated toward each other in crowded rooms like magnets, and the way simple touches started to linger. A hand on the small of her back, fingers brushing when passing objects, and sitting close enough on the couch that their thighs touched. On the 60th day they attended a formal charity gala, which was Amara's first major public appearance as crown princess. She wore a dress she'd designed herself, a stunning fusion of Korean and African aesthetics where the bodice was structured like a hanbok jaggery but made from Ankara print fabric in rich blues and golds. The skirt flowed like a traditional chima but with layers of tulle that gave it modern princess volume, African brass jewelry at her wrists and neck with her natural hair styled in an elaborate updo with decorative pins. She looked like a bridge between two worlds, and the fashion press went absolutely insane. Donghyun couldn't take his eyes off her all night, and during the formal dance portion of the evening he pulled her closer than protocol required, with his hand splayed across her back burning through the fabric. "You're making this very difficult," he murmured with his lips close to her ear, and Amara's pulse raced. "Making what difficult?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak, saying, "Remembering that this is temporary." The ballroom spun around them, but all Amara could see was him, and all she could feel was the heat of his body and the way he held her like she was something precious. They didn't talk about it that night because they didn't need to. The truth hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. They were falling for each other, or maybe they'd already fallen, but the countdown continued. 70 days, 75, 80, and each day brought them closer to the end and deeper into something neither of them knew how to name. On day 85, Donghyun took Amara to a private beach house that belonged to his family with just the two of them, no guards, no staff and no protocol. It was the most freedom either of them had felt in months. They walked along the water at sunset with waves lapping at their bare feet while the sky was painted in impossible colors, orange and pink and purple bleeding together, and finally he said what they'd both been avoiding. "I don't want you to leave." Amara stopped walking because her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. Donghyun. But he turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I know what we agreed to. I know this was supposed to be temporary, but I can't imagine going back to my life before you. You make everything feel possible. You make me feel alive, and you make me feel like I can be more than just a crown prince. Like I can be a person." Amara wanted to say yes. She wanted to forget the contract and the money and the impossible complications, but reality crashed over her like a wave. "Your family would never accept it. The public barely tolerates me now, and if we tried to make this real it would destroy you, your position, and everything you've worked for." Donghyun's grip on her hands tightened. "I don't care. Let them take it all, because I'd rather have you and nothing else than have everything without you." But Amara did care, because she cared about him too much to let him throw away his future. "We have 5 more days," she said softly with tears streaming down her face. "Let's not ruin them by pretending this can be something it's not." The last 5 days were torture as they spent every possible moment together trying to memorize each other. Donghyun taught Amara traditional Korean calligraphy with his hands covering hers as he guided the brush while she made him watch her favorite American movies and laughed at his commentary. They stayed up until dawn sharing stories, laughing, touching and existing in a bubble they both knew would burst. On the 88th day Jaiwa found Amara alone and hugged her tight, saying, "You could stay, you know, if you wanted to, if you fought for it." But Amara shook her head. "He deserves someone who doesn't come with all these complications, someone his family approves of, and someone who makes his life easier, not harder." Jaiwa pulled back, looking at her with fierce eyes. "You're wrong. He deserves someone who makes him happy, and that's you." On the 89th night Amara packed her bags while Donghyun was at a required council meeting because she couldn't do a big goodbye and she couldn't watch him watch her leave. The money had been transferred. Her family was secure and she'd fulfilled her part of the contract, so it was time to go. She folded each piece of clothing carefully, leaving behind all the hanbok and formal wear because she was taking only what she'd brought. Nothing that belonged to this palace or this life. She left a note on his pillow with just 3 words: "Thank you." Always, no explanation and no goodbye, because she couldn't bear to put into words everything she was feeling. She planned to slip out through a side entrance at dawn before anyone was awake. The car was already arranged. She'd be at the airport before breakfast and back to New York before dinner, back to her old life like none of this had ever happened. But as she walked through the palace corridors for the last time carrying her single suitcase, she heard running footsteps behind her, heavy, fast and desperate. She turned and there he was, Donghyun, still in his formal clothes from the meeting, with hair disheveled and breathing hard like he'd been sprinting. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye." Tears streamed down Amara's face. It was easier this way. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Easier for who? His hands cupped her face with thumbs wiping away her tears. "Amara, listen to me. I love you. I am in love with you, and I don't care about the contract or the council or what anyone thinks. You are the only person who's ever made me feel like myself. You are the only person I've ever wanted to choose, so please don't go." Amara's heart was breaking and soaring at the same time. "I love you too, but that's exactly why I have to leave, because if I stay they'll destroy you, and I won't let that happen." Donghyun shook his head and she saw he was crying too. She'd never seen him cry. "Then let them try, because I choose you and I will always choose you." He dropped to his knees right there in the palace corridor, this proud prince humbling himself completely. "You were never my contract. You were my choice. Stay with me, not for 90 days but forever." Amara pulled him to his feet, kissing him through tears and laughter and overwhelming emotion. "You're sure? Really sure? Because there's no going back from this." Donghyun smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The announcement came 3 days later when Crown Prince Lee Donghyun addressed the nation in a live broadcast with Amara standing beside him holding his hand. He told the truth about the arrangement, about falling in love and about choosing his own path forward. The public reaction was explosive as some people celebrated it as a modern fairy tale while others were furious. The royal council demanded a private meeting that lasted 6 hours, and they threatened everything: his position, his title, and his inheritance. But Donghyun held firm, and with Amara at his side he negotiated a new path where he would retain his title but step back from certain duties, and they would prove themselves through action, through service, and through time. The fight wasn't easy, and there were moments Amara wanted to give up. Moments when the hate mail and death threats felt like too much, but Donghyun never wavered, and slowly, surprisingly, allies emerged. Donghyun's mother surprisingly became their biggest ally because she saw in Amara the same strength she'd once had before the crown dimmed her own light. She'd sacrificed her art and her dreams for duty, and she didn't want her son to do the same. Princess Jaiwa went on social media defending her Brother and sister-in-law becoming a voice for progressive change within the royal family while young people rallied behind them and international support poured in. A year later they renewed their vows, but this time in a ceremony that was theirs. Amara wore a dress of her own design, a masterpiece that blended every part of who she was while her mother and brother were there crying happy tears. The palace gardens were filled with people who'd come to celebrate love that refused to follow rules, and as Donghyun kissed his wife properly this time with nothing held back, Amara thought about that first night. The girl who agreed to 90 days because she had no other choice. She never could have imagined this, that a contract would become a forever and that duty would transform into destiny. No regrets? Donghyun whispered against her lips and Amara smiled, pulling him closer. Not a single one.